given the fact that we've seen a significant drop in temperature in Johannesburg, I know that you guys in Cape Town are still enjoying the sun. A lot of concern as to whether we're going to experience blackouts this winter. Listening to some of the rhetoric coming through from the Department of Energy, talking about bringing down demand by around 13%, but at the same time also saying that there are no planned blackouts this winter, and then also hearing about load shedding schedules. What have you heard thus far, and are you convinced that we're going to have lights on throughout the winter?
Hi, I think that if we do manage to keep the lights on throughout the winter, that will be a great outcome, but it's probably very unlikely. I know that Eskom has added some capacity to the grid since the last time that we experienced the rolling blackouts, and I know that they have focused on trying to implement some demand side measures to get people using less electricity, but those things take quite a long time to have an impact, and the likelihood is that if it's not consumers, it will be big business that will be seeing blackouts and that will be forced to shut down their sort of, their alloy plants and their mines and things like that in order to, keep the grid integrity in place.
With regards to demand going forward, and we know that we, as South Africa, need to work together to try and bring energy demand down. Do you think that the corporate market has done enough, especially those mining companies, to try and be more efficient with regards to energy usage, or do you think we still have a long way to go?
Yeah, look, I mean, generally in South Africa, it's quite clear that we're a nation that has grown up on cheap energy, and a lot of our competitive advantages come from cheap electricity prices. But I think that given the projected, trajectory for the price path in South Africa, most large organizations have started to put in place programs to make themselves as efficient as possible. And I know that a lot of the sort of larger and more electricity intensive users have already gone down that road a long way. I think that as a nation, though, it's something that's going to take a while to get into our psyche, that we need to be more careful about how we use energy. But rising tariffs will take care of that.
Exactly, and we've actually seen that coming to the fore, and it's going to be a reality for South Africa in the next couple of years. I'd like to touch on the integrated resource plan. Many have, of course, raised a lot of question marks as to the viability of this, because we know that by 2030 we should be seeing a large chunk of the energy produced in the country should come from renewable energy. Do you think that is a possibility? Do you think it's perhaps over ambitious?
You know what, I mean, South Africa's changed its policy on how we go about building power, and I think that it's a good thing in the long run. We're now focused on things like localization and stimulating a green economy in South Africa, curbing carbon emissions, things like that, whereas in the past we used to focus on least cost, as our main driver. So what that means is that we have to implement a lot of renewable energy. And that's the focus for government in the short term, and we've heard an announcement that Refit 1, the 1,000 megawatts, will be decided by the end of the year, or will be out by the end of the year, and so that's very positive on that front. There is a cost attached to that in terms of the electricity price path, and the second thing is that you have to install a lot more renewable energy in order to get the same impact as, say, a coal-fired power plant, because of the efficiency and availability of the resources like wind and sun. So I think that it's a good thing, but I think that it's going to be expensive, and we're going to have problems implementing it initially, I'm sure.
Well, I mean, with regards to that, we know that the IRP, in fact, has not had an economic impact assessment done as yet. We know that that's still in the pipeline. You're talking about it being very costly, and of course there's a massive play between ensuring that we have growth and sustainable growth and create jobs, but at the same time try and head towards a path of renewable energy. Do you think that we can get the balance right? Because we know we've actually seen a lot of failures coming through in the European markets. Are there lessons that can be learned, would you say, Marc?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are lessons that can be learned, and I think the other thing to keep in mind is that every economy is different, and what applies in Europe is not necessarily what applies in South Africa. But there are things we can take away, and generally the programs in Europe and overseas have relied heavily on government investment to continue them and to get started, and they haven't found that there's been as great an economic benefit as they would have liked in the long term. So I think that we need to keep that in mind, absolutely. And I think that, as you rightly point out, we've sort of put the cart before the horse here, and that we haven't actually done a serious economic impact assessment to establish what the rising electricity prices mean to South Africa. There could be a lot of good that comes out of it. However, we need to keep in mind that in South Africa we lack skills, we lack the experience and the manufacturing capability for a lot of the equipment that's used in renewable energy. Some of it can be done here, but it's going to take time before that starts to contribute to our economy. And in the meantime, it may have the rising electricity prices may have a very adverse impact on those businesses which contribute to our GDP and our balance of trade, the exports that we use for our foreign currency.
Well, Mark, until we do get that economic impact assessment about integrating renewable energy to around the extent of 42% of capacity in the country, we know that, as I mentioned, is the target by 2030. Some would say that this is just going to create a more uncompetitive environment because it's going to be more costly to do business here. Labour is going to increase dramatically as well because of electricity just increasing more than what we have seen and more than what we're expecting, 25% increases over the next 2 to 3 years or so. In terms of analysis going forward, Mark, do you think that it can be done? And I ask you this again, do you think that it's overly ambitious? If we could just be completely honest at this point in time, are we just going to face an African continent with coal-fired power stations as a reality?
Yeah, well, hopefully not. I mean, the rest of Africa doesn't have a huge coal resources to draw on. So in places like Kenya, for example, we've seen a lot of implementation of geothermal and renewable energy projects successfully. I think South Africa's target is very ambitious, to answer your question. And I think that we'll probably find that we won't be able to do as much as we would have liked, and that the IRP will change significantly a number of times over the next 20 years. But I think it's also good to have a target that we aim for. And I think it's right that we try and put in place the building blocks to move towards a more efficient economy, an economy which doesn't rely on cheap electricity to remain competitive. That's something that will hinder us in the medium and long term. It's not going to, all we're going to be doing is maintaining the status quo if we keep on trying to rely on cheap energy. Yeah. So I guess it's a question of, do we want to take the pain now, or do we want to wait and try and transition to the new economy? And I think that if we could find a way to transition more smoothly, and still rely on some of our resources like cheap coal, that would be better than just cutting us off and trying to move straight away to this renewable energy economy.